The great halls of the Unified Galactic Council Station were silent. The air, usually humming with the soft conversations of 100 species, hung heavy. On the main observation deck, a Caldarian hologram flickered. It was their ambassador, a being of slender grace, with skin like polished pearl and large, dark eyes that held the light of a dying star. His voice, translated into the common galactic tongue, was a thread of pure despair. We have no more worlds to run to. Our ships are broken. Our children are afraid. We have called for aid and heard only silence. We have offered treaties and received only pity. Now we have nothing left to offer but our plea. To any civilization who hears this, to any being who values life over the void, we beg you. We plead to the stars themselves for mercy. Help us, or witness our end. The transmission ended, leaving only the cold, silent starfield displayed on the massive viewport. Around the deck, diplomats and observers from a dozen advanced species shifted uncomfortably. The Caldarians were not enemies. They were artists, philosophers, a gentle people who had reached the stars with minds, not might. Their misfortune was to live in the path of the Vorak, the head of the council, a wise and ancient being from a species that looked like a tree made of crystal, spoke. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. The Vorak are a force of nature, a galactic storm of teeth and hunger. They do not negotiate. They do not stop. To fight them is to fight the tide. Our analysis is final. Sending a fleet would be a symbolic sacrifice. It would not save the Caldarians. It would only add more names to the lost. The matter is, with profound sorrow, closed. A murmur of reluctant agreement moved through the crowd. It was logical. It was sensible. It was the kind of decision that kept civilizations alive. On the lower tier of the observation deck, leaning against a cold railing, Lee Hanna watched. She was young for a human diplomat, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her hands clenched at her sides. The official galactic translation of the Caldarian's final words echoed in her mind. We plead to the stars for mercy. Mercy. The word felt small here. It was a word for individuals, for moments of kindness between neighbors. It had no weight against the endless, mindless hunger of the Vorak swarms she had seen in the tactical briefings. They were not evil. They were simply a biological machine that consumed all complex organic matter in its path, leaving sterile rock behind. To them, a Caldarian city and a forest were the same. Fuel.Hanna had been on the council station for 2 years, the sole junior liaison from Earth. Earth was a footnote in galactic history. A Death World Class 12, a designation for planets with such extreme and hostile biospheres that native life was considered tragically unfortunate and, more importantly, not worth the risk of contact. Humanity had been quietly quarantined, observed from a distance, and largely forgotten. They had been given basic translation tech and a seat on the Minor Observation Council as a courtesy, a gesture to a species that had, against all odds, clawed its way to its own moon. The other diplomats saw her as a curiosity, like a survivor of a terrible accident. They were polite, but their eyes held a distant pity. Her planet was a tragedy. Her people were ghosts, living on borrowed time on a world that wanted them dead. They did not understand that humanity's story was not one of surviving despite their world, but because of it. As the crowd dispersed, talking in hushed tones about the inevitable, Hanna did not move. She stared at the coordinates still floating next to the Caldarian star system on the screen. Logic said the council was right. Sending ships was suicide. But doing nothing, that was a choice too. A choice to let a beautiful, gentle light be snuffed out because it was inconvenient to save. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Her grandfather, in their home in Seoul, tending a small, resilient bonsai tree that had survived a brutal winter. "The universe is not fair, Hana," he had said, his rough hands gently pruning a dead branch. "Fairness is something life creates. It is a shelter we build against the cold. If we see a shelter falling and do not help, we let the cold in too." Earth had no fleet. It had no planet cracking weapons. It had nothing the galaxy valued. But it had something the galaxy feared. It had survived the monsters. It had lived with them, studied them, and in its most secret vaults, preserved them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a crazy thought. A career-ending, possibly species-ending thought. To contact Earth directly for a military action was a violation of a dozen council protocols. Earth's government, the United Terran Directorate, was insular and secretive. They might not even answer, but they were the only ones who might understand a fight for survival against impossible odds. Her fingers flew across the private datapad on her wrist. She isolated the Keldarian's raw plea, the one with the true emotion in his voice, not the sanitized galactic translation. She attached the full, uncompressed tactical data on the Vorak, their swarm patterns, their energy signatures, their consumption rates. Then she typed a short, encrypted message in Korean, using a childhood code she and her brother had invented. "No one is coming. They are going to die. The enemy is biological, a consumer of worlds. We are the only ones from a world that fights back. Ask the Guardians. Send the answer to these coordinates. I will be waiting." She included her personal authentication code, the one that would prove it was her and that the situation was dire. The station's communication network was vast and monitored. But the human embassy, small and mostly ignored, had its own tight beam laser array, a relic from early attempts to phone home. It was slow, and it would take days for the message to reach Earth, but it was virtually untraceable by galactic standards. It was a whisper in a roaring room. Hana moved quickly to the human liaison office, a small, sparse room. She initiated the connection, her palms sweaty. The screen showed only the status. Tight beam initiated. Target, Sol system. Transmission in progress. For a long moment, she just stared at it. She had just potentially thrown away her position. Earth's tenuous standing. Everything. For a people she had never met, whose only crime was being gentle in a harsh universe. On the main viewport outside, she could see the soft glow of the nebula near the Keldarian system. Somewhere over there, right now, the Vorak were falling upon the last Keldarian city. The plea was over. Now, there was only the waiting, and the dying Hana sat down in the quiet room. She did not pray to the stars for mercy. The stars, she knew, were silent and cold. Instead, she thought of Earth. She thought of its furious storms, its deep oceans hiding ancient things, its forests where life warred with life in a constant, vibrant struggle. She thought of the stories, the old myths of monsters that lived in shadows and mountains. The galaxy had turned its back. It had chosen logic over compassion. So be it that her message was not a plea. It was a warning and a question. A question only her home, the quarantined death world, could answer. As the transmission counter ticked up, she whispered to the empty room, "You asked the stars for mercy. But the stars are just balls of fire. Maybe. Maybe you need to ask the dark. Maybe you need the things that live in it." The message from the stars arrived as a silent digital scream. It was received in a bunker so deep beneath the Himalayan peaks that the rock above hummed with a pressure older than humanity. This was the heart of the United Terran Directorate's most secret project. The Ark of Twilight. Kim Jun sat in a dimly lit monitoring station, his eyes tired. He was an exobiologist, a man who had spent his life studying the terrible and wonderful things that had evolved on Earth. His work was not about starships or lasers. It was about the chemical scream of a venom, the perfect ambush strategy of an ancient predator, the world-ending resilience of a bacterium. On his screen, data from Lihana's transmission unspooled. The graceful, desperate face of the Keldarian ambassador. The cold, swarm-like advance of the Vorak. The tactical readouts were clear. This was an ecological event. An invasive species of a galactic scale. Across the table, Commander Park Min watched the same footage, his face a mask of granite. He was a soldier who had fought in the Resource Wars, a conflict that had nearly broken the planet before the Directorate had unified it. He had seen what desperation looked like. "They're already dead," he said, his voice low and rough. "That swarm pattern, it's a closing net. The Galactic Council is right to stay away. It's a suicide run." "They're not asking for a fleet, Commander," Kim Jun replied, zooming in on a Vorak bioship. It looked like a malignant starfish, pulsing and growing as it consumed the debris of a Kaldarian vessel. "They're asking for a miracle. Or mercy. Hannah knows we don't deal in those. Then why did she send this?" Park Min gestured angrily at the screen. "She broke protocol. She's put our entire observation status at risk for a funeral notice." Before Kim Jun could answer, the heavy security door to the chamber hissed open. A woman walked in, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. This was Choi Yunji. She was older than both men, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes holding a calm that was deeper than any ocean trench. She wore the simple gray uniform of the Directorate's Science Division, but she commanded the room like a general. She was the head of the Guardian program. "She sent it," Choi Yunji said, her voice quiet but absolute, "because Hannah understands what the galaxy has forgotten, and what we have tried to make them forget." She moved to the main console and entered a series of commands. The tragic image of the Keldarians was replaced by a new visual. It was a catalog, but not of weapons. It was a bestiary, a creature with scales that seemed to drink the light, a crown of bone around its head, and eyes that glowed with a pale, sickly fire. The label read, "Basilisk Terrestrial Variant G7. Note scrolled beside it. Gaze induces rapid, catastrophic cellular mineralization. Effective range, 800 meters. Control method, sonic sublimation. Another, a vast, amorphous shape, all tentacles and beak, moving through a pressurized water tank with terrifying grace. Kraken Deep Abyssal Variant. Vacuum adaptive via self-contained hydrostatic field. Capable of molecular scale manipulation for ship infiltration. Primary motivation, territorial curiosity. Another, a lean, skeletal form that seemed to be made more of shadow than substance, standing in a chamber where the temperature was near absolute zero. Wendigo, Arctic variant. Psychotropic aura induces profound thermophilic panic in complex neural systems. Feeds on biothermal energy. Lures prey via empathy suppression. Park Min stared, his soldier's mind struggling to compute. "These are monsters. Old stories, nightmares. They are Earth's children," Choi Yunji corrected him gently. "Predators from our planet's most violent evolutionary eras. We did not conquer them, Commander. We could not. They were too perfectly adapted. When the Biosphere Wars ended and the Directorate unified, we faced a choice. Annihilate the last of our planet's original sovereigns, or preserve them. We chose preservation. We learned their language. Not words, but the language of stimulus and response, of territory and threat." Kim Jun leaned forward, his scientist's mind alight. "The Vorak, they're an apex consumer, a swarm. They've never faced a true competitor. They've never encountered a predator that specializes in hunting the hunter." "Exactly," Choi Yunji said. "The galaxy sees a death world and pities us. They do not understand that a death world is not a place where life is weak. It is a place where life is so strong, so ruthless and creative that it forges endless checks and balances. The Vorak are a fire. Our guardians are the flood, the earthquake, the ice. Park Min shook his head. You're proposing we release these things onto another world? Into a space battle? The ethical lines, the collateral damage, are already being crossed. Kim Jun interrupted, pointing to the screen where the Vorak swarm was dissolving a Keldarian habitat dome. The Keldarians are not just being killed, Commander. Their entire biological essence is being erased, consumed, turned into more Vorak. It is the ultimate ecological crime. This is not a war. It is a sterilization. He brought up Hana's personal message. We are the only ones from a world that fights back. A long silence filled the bunker. The hum of the deep earth was the only sound. Finally, Choi Yunji spoke. The Ark of Twilight is not a warship. It is a seed vault for the most dangerous organisms ever to walk, swim, or fly on our planet. We have one vessel capable of transporting a containment team and a selection of guardians. The Jirion. Its drives are slow by galactic standards. It will take us weeks to get there. And when we arrive? Park Min asked, his pragmatism finally engaging with the madness. What is the mission? Liberation? Annihilation? Introduction, Kim Jun said softly, looking at the basilisk's frozen image. We introduce a new variable into the Vorak's perfect equation. We give the swarm a problem it cannot consume, a nightmare it did not create. The Council will see it as an act of barbarism, Park Min stated. The Council left a gentle people to die because it was logical, Choi Yunji replied, her calm never wavering. Let them call us barbarians. Let them be terrified of what else lives in the dark of our world. It is time they remembered why they quarantined us. Not out of pity, but out of fear. The decision was made. It was not made by a committee or a vote. It was made in that deep, silent room by 3 people who understood the true nature of their home. They would not send soldiers. They would not send diplomats pleading for reason. They would send the dark. Orders were given. In a hangar carved from the mountain's belly, the Jirion was prepared. It was a ship like no other, its hull designed not for beauty or speed, but for absolute containment. Its holds were not barracks or cargo bays. They were biomes, frozen tundras, pressurized abyssal tanks, lifeless caves. Kim Jun would go as the lead exobiologist, the interpreter of the monsters. Commander Park Min would go to handle the tactical deployment, the soldier tasked with weaponizing a zoo. And they would travel to the coordinates Hana had sent, to the edge of the dying Keldarian light dot, as final systems checks scrolled on the screens. Park Min looked at Kim Jun. Do you really think this will work? Or are we just delivering a more interesting meal to the Vorak? Kim Jun watched a feed from the Kraken's tank. The great beast was curiously probing a sensor with one tentacle, then losing interest and drifting away. It was not evil. It was simply, utterly what it was. I think, Kim Jun said, that for billions of years on Earth, the only rule was eat or be eaten. The Vorak have only known how to eat. They have forgotten the second part of the rule. We are going to remind them. High above, under stars that offered no mercy, a single dark ship lifted from the silent mountains and began its long, slow journey into the nightmare. The void near the Keldarian system was no longer silent. It was a symphony of endings. The last refugee ships, graceful silver petals of Keldarian design, were being run down by the jagged, organic forms of the Vorak swarm. The larger Vorak bioships, like cancerous asteroids, hung in the low orbit of the last green and blue Keldarian world, spitting streams of smaller, faster hunterforms onto the surface. From the bridge of the main Keldarian command vessel, a fragile thing of crystalline spires, the ambassador watched the final lights of his civilization blink out, one by one. The plea to the stars had been answered only with the indifferent mathematics of consumption out then. A new star sparked into existence at the edge of the system. It was not the bright, clean tear of a galactic council warp drive. This was a darker bloom, a rift that seemed to suck in the light before vomiting out a single black shape. The Geryon slid into real space. It was blunt, angular, and utterly devoid of the graceful lines of galactic engineering. To the Caldarians scanning it, the ship read as almost inert, a cold rock with a faint energy signature. A tomb ship, perhaps. A final witness. On the Geryon's bridge, the view was different. Kim June watched the tactical overlay paint the system in shades of horror. The Vorak swarm was a pulsing red cloud dense over the planet in its orbital space. The few remaining Caldarian signals were desperate blue sparks, fleeing and dying. No response to hails, Liana said, her fingers flying over the comm panel. Her face was pale but set. She had left the council station, defied orders, and rendezvoused with the Geryon in a risky shuttle flight. She was their link, their translator for a hope that had none. The Caldarian command channel is just panic, and the Vorak are ignoring us completely. We're too small. We're not food yet. Commander Park Min stood with his arms crossed, his eyes on the main screen. Good. Let them ignore us. Choi Yun-ji, are the Guardians ready? From the biocontainment control suite, deep within the ship, Choi Yun-ji's voice came over the speaker, calm as a deep lake. All primary specimens are stable. The release canisters are programmed. We have a limited window. The Vorak swarm intelligence will notice the disruption soon. Kim June studied the swarm pattern. It moved with a horrible, beautiful efficiency, like bacteria consuming a nutrient plate. There was no fear, no tactics, just pure, hungry process. We don't attack the main bodies, he said, thinking aloud. That's what they expect. We introduce the conflict at the edges. We break the pattern. Target the Vorak hunter streams, the ones moving between the bioships and the planet. Park Min nodded, understanding. Cut the supply lines. Introduce a predator into their feeding ground. The order was given. The Geryon moved, not with speed, but with a grim, steady purpose, positioning itself between two large Vorak bioships and the planet below. To any watching Caldarian, it must have looked like a final, foolish act of suicide. Release sequence Alpha, Choi Yun-ji's voice intoned. From the black hull of the Geryon, a series of pods, no larger than escape capsules, were silently ejected. They did not rocket toward the enemy. They simply drifted, like seeds on a solar wind, into the path of the streaming Vorak hunters. The Vorak took the bait. Several hunter forms, seeing small, dense objects of unknown biological signature, broke from their stream to investigate. They enveloped the pods, their surfaces beginning to secrete digestive acids. The pods did not explode. They opened dot from the first pod in the airless void. Something uncoiled. It was sinuous and scaled, and where light touched it, the light seemed to dim. The basilisk had no need to breathe. It oriented itself, its crown of bone turning toward the nearest Vorak hunter. It did not attack with claw or tooth. It simply looked. A beam of pale, ghostly energy, invisible to most sensors, but clear as a searchlight to the Geryon's specialized equipment, lanced out. Where it touched the Vorak hunter, the effect was instant and horrifying. The vibrant, pulsing red chitin of the creature turned gray, then white, then crumbled into a fine mineral dust that scattered into the vacuum. The basilisk, unconcerned, turned its gaze to another. From another pod, the kraken emerged. It did not float. It swam. A field of shimmering energy, a self-contained pocket of crushing pressure and freezing water, surrounded it. A Vorak bioship, sensing a large anomalous energy signature, turned a weaponized appendage toward it. The kraken's tentacles, each thicker than a tree trunk, lashed out. They did not strike with brute force. They tasted. They gripped the bioship's hull, and where they touched, the organic metal seemed to soften, to flow, and then to tear apart as if it were rotten fruit. The kraken pulled itself toward the wound, curious, its enormous beak seeking the pulsing interior. But the most profound attack was silent. From a third pod, the Wendigo emerged. It was hard to see, a blur of shadow and suggestion. It had no physical attack. It projected, a wave of wrongness pulsed from it. On the Gerion's bridge, the crew felt it as a sudden, deep chill, a feeling of being watched from a dark, hungry place. For the Vorak, connected by a crude swarm mind, the effect was catastrophic. The hunter forms nearest to the Wendigo did not turn to dust or get torn apart. They simply stopped. They drifted, their coordinated movements seizing up. Then, in a silent, violent spasm, they turned on each other, driven by a sudden, overwhelming psychic imperative to consume anything warm to stave off the impossible cold. Now screaming in their hive-sense.chaos erupted in a perfect, geometric slice of the battlefront. The Vorak swarm, for the first time, encountered something it could not immediately process, consume, or overwhelm. The basilisk was turning biomass into inert stone. The kraken was dismantling structures out of territorial curiosity. The Wendigo was injecting pure, psychological terror into a mind that had never known fear. On the Keldarian command vessel, the ambassador stared, his large eyes wide with a new kind of terror. He saw the dark ship. He saw the things that had come from it. They were not saviors. They were abominations, nightmares given form. They were fighting the Vorak, yes, but the manner of it was unspeakable. This was not a battle of energy shields and plasma bolts. This was something older, uglier, a regression to a tooth-and-claw reality his civilized soul had never imagined. He turned to his communication officer, his voice a whisper. What are they? Who answered our call? The officer, scanning the Gerion, found the faint new signal Lihana was now broadcasting on an open channel. It was a simple, repeating message in the Keldarian tongue. Do not interfere. Do not approach. You pleaded to the stars. The stars sent no one. Earth has come. Earth, the death world. The quarantined planet. The ambassador understood then. They had not been sent mercy. They had been sent the dark answer to their darkest hour. They had begged for a shield and had been given a fang. As he watched a Vorak bioship writhe and go still, half its structure turned to crumbling mineral by the drifting basilisk, he felt no hope. Only a deep, shuddering awe and the chilling knowledge that the universe held horrors even the Vorak could not match. The change in the Vorak swarm was not immediate. It was slow, like a vast machine grinding its gears. For its entire existence, the swarm had known only one rule: move forward, consume, grow. It had no concept of loss, only of conversion. A Keldarian ship was not destroyed. It was broken down and became more swarm. A planet was not conquered. It was digested. But now, something was happening that the hive intelligence could not file away. The Guardians did not fight like enemies. They acted like forces of nature. Kim Jun watched the sensor feeds, his scientific mind separating the horror from the fascinating reality. The basilisk, which they had codenamed Medusa, drifted lazily through a cluster of Vorak hunter forms. Each time its pale gaze swept over them, they did not explode or burn. They simply ceased to be living things. Their complex organic compounds locked into rigid crystalline structures and then disintegrated into dust. The swarm tried to adapt. It sent larger armored forms at the basilisk. The result was the same: just taking a fraction of a second longer. The basilisk was not killing them. It was deleting them from the biological equation, turning animated matter into inert mineral. It was a walking, flying entropy. "This is not predation," Kim June murmured to Lee Hanna on the bridge. She stood beside him, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. "Predation has a purpose: food, energy. This is negation." Meanwhile, the Kraken Leviathan had latched onto one of the mid-sized Vorak bioships. It wasn't trying to eat the ship. It was exploring it. Its immense tentacles, sheathed in their shimmering hydrostatic field, probed every opening, every seam. Where they found pulsing, warm, living chambers inside the bioship, they squeezed. Organic support beams snapped. Nutrient fluid lines burst, freezing instantly into bloody ice in the vacuum. The Vorak ship thrashed, firing bioacid and kinetic spines. The spines punched into the Kraken's field, slowed and stuck, doing little damage. The acid was diluted and frozen by the intense cold of the creature's self-contained ocean. The Kraken, annoyed, gave a powerful thrust of its tentacles and ripped a whole quarter of the bioship away, exposing its throbbing core to space. Then, bored, it pushed off toward another interesting-looking cluster of lights. But it was the Wendigo, Frost, that was causing the deepest, most systemic damage. Commander Park Min tracked its path with awe. The creature itself was just a blur, a sensor ghost. But its effect was a visible wave moving through the swarm. Vorak hunter forms in its wake didn't attack it. They stopped. Their smooth, coordinated movements became jerky and confused. Then, driven by the psychic panic, the Wendigo emitted a deep, screaming signal of heat loss and starvation. They turned on the nearest source of complex energy, each other. Hunter forms tore into their own kind, trying to consume the warmth and biomass of their siblings to fight off the impossible cold infecting their hive mind. It was a virus of madness. The swarm intelligence is trying to understand. Choi Yunji's voice came from the biosuite. It is receiving data from its lost units: mineralization, structural dissolution, thermal psychic panic. These concepts have no reference point. It is trying to categorize a new type of threat, but it has no category for things that act this way. On the Keldarian command ship, the atmosphere had shifted from despair to a tense, fearful vigil. The ambassador and his officers watched the silent, brutal spectacle. The Vorak swarm around the planet's main attack zone was no longer a cohesive red cloud on their screens. It was breaking apart into swirling eddies of chaos. A patch would go gray and still as the basilisk passed through. A bioship would writhe and then go dark as the Kraken dismantled it. A whole sector would dissolve into a mad, self-cannibalizing frenzy in the wake of the Wendigo. "They are winning," a young Keldarian officer whispered, his voice full of confused hope. "The monsters are winning." The ambassador said nothing. He watched a feed where the Black Earth ship, the Gerion, hung motionless, a dark star at the center of the unfolding nightmare. It did not fire weapons. It did not launch fighters. It simply watched and occasionally released another small, silent pod that bloomed into a new terror. This was not a rescue. It was a demonstration, a lesson. His people had created beautiful art, profound music, philosophies of light and connection. They had believed the universe, while harsh, operated on principles that could be understood, even if they were cruel. What he saw now broke that belief. This was chaos. This was the universe's dark underbelly, where life was not about connection, but about a deeper, older truth. Existence at any cost, in any form. A sharp alarm sounded on the Gerion's bridge. "Swarm pattern shift," Parkman announced, his voice tense. "They've stopped all attacks on the Keldarian remnants. They're retasking. Every mobile unit in the sector is converging on our position." On the screen, The red cloud of the Vorak recoiled from the planet, like a wounded animal pulling back its limbs. Then, with a sudden, terrifying unity, it reformed and surged. Not toward the planet, but outward, toward the single black ship that was the source of the disruption. A tidal wave of teeth and chitin, thousands of hunter forms and dozens of bioships moved as one. The intelligence had made a decision. It could not understand the new variables, so it would drown them in sheer mass. It would bury the Gerion and its nightmares under the weight of the entire swarm. Evasive maneuvers. Park Min barked. No, Kim Jun said, his eyes still locked on the data. Hold position. Choi Yunji, it's time. Release the final safeguard. Release the Queen. From the deepest hold of the Gerion, a final, larger pod was ejected. It did not drift. It propelled itself directly into the heart of the oncoming tidal wave of Vorak. The swarm consumed it instantly, hundreds of hunter forms wrapping around it, beginning the digestion process. For a second, nothing happened. Then, from inside the mass of Vorak bodies, a new light appeared. Not a laser or an explosion. A soft, pulsing green light. It was bioluminescence. The pod had not contained a predator dot. It had contained a hive. What emerged was not a single monster, but a cloud. Millions of tiny, insect-like creatures, each the size of a human hand, poured forth. They were based on the most successful, most ruthless social organism Earth had ever produced, the army ant. But these were space-adapted. They did not attack the Vorak ships. They landed on them. They crawled into every crack, every vent, every orifice. And they began to dismantle. Not to eat, but to deconstruct. They used powerful chemical acids to sever neural connections, to cut muscle-like cables, to dissolve binding tissues. They worked with a silent, terrifying efficiency. A Vorak bioship, leading the charge, suddenly veered off course, dead and dark, its insides turned to Swiss cheese by a billion tiny, precise cuts. Then another, and another. The wave of Vorak crashed against an invisible wall of microscopic deconstruction. The swarm intelligence, faced with a threat that was at once too small, too numerous, and too strategically alien, finally broke. The data overload was complete. It had no response to a weapon that was also a colony, to a predator that was also a disease, to a force that did not seek to consume, but only to unmake. The unified surge shattered. The Vorak swarm lost its single mind. Individual bioships and hunter form clusters, now operating on base instinct, began to flee in every direction, scattering into the dark, away from the green, pulsing light of the ant cloud and the other silent horrors. On the bridge of the Gerion, the crew watched the enemy disintegrate, not from firepower, but from confusion, terror, and systemic collapse. Lee Hanna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It's over. Kim Jun shook his head slowly, watching the basilisk turn its head to watch the scattering swarm with its cold, dead eyes. No, he said. It's not over. The Vorak are just learning a new rule. The rule of the food chain. And they have just found themselves somewhere in the middle. The silence that followed was heavier than the battle. The last echoes of the Vorak swarm's psychic death scream faded into the void, leaving only the drifting, inert hulks of their bioships and the fine, glittering dust that had once been their hunter forms. The green bioluminescent cloud of the ant colony, its work done, slowly gathered itself, drawn back to its containment pod by a chemical beacon from the Gerion. One by one, the other guardians were also recalled. The basilisk turned its mineralizing gaze away from the stars and drifted toward the ship. The kraken released the torn carcass it had been investigating and swam back, its tentacles folding. The Wendigo simply blurred and was gone, a cold feeling lifting from the minds of everyone in the system. On the Caldarian command vessel, the view was one of salvation draped in terror. Their world was saved. The cities on the surface, though scarred, were no longer being consumed. But the sight of the small black Earth ship, now surrounded by the returning nightmares it had unleashed, filled them with a deep religious dread. A request for a meeting came, not from the Caldarians, but from the Unified Galactic Council. Their observers had seen everything. The signal was direct and type-beamed to the Gerion. Commander Park Min accepted. On the main screen, the crystalline form of the council head appeared. Its wind-chime voice was stripped of its usual calm, vibrating with a mixture of shock and stern authority. Earth Vessel Gerion, you have introduced uncontrolled, hyper-lethal bioweapons into a sovereign system. You have violated interstellar containment protocols. You will stand down and submit to a council quarantine team for inspection and decommissioning of your cargo. Before Park Min could give the sharp reply forming on his lips, Kim Jun stepped forward. He spoke calmly. Council head, the Caldarians pleaded for aid. You offered none. Your quarantine of Earth was based on the perceived threat of our biosphere. You called it hyperlethal. You are correct. Today, you witnessed what that means. We did not bring weapons. We brought predators. The Vorak were an invasive species. On Earth, the only cure for an invasive species is a predator. The problem is now solved. Solved? The council head's form shimmered. You have unleashed abominations. We have unleashed balance. Choi Yunji's voice came over the cum from her lab. She appeared in a secondary window on the screen, her face serene. And we have contained them. Can your council contain the Vorak? Could you have contained them? Our abominations answer to us. They are part of our world's fabric. You asked us to stay in our cage, but you also left the Caldarians to die. You do not get to make both choices. A new window opened. It was the Caldarian ambassador. He looked aged, his luminous eyes dim. He spoke directly to the council head. Honored council. They came, when no other would. They saved what remains of my people. I do not understand their methods. I fear their power, but I acknowledge their result. We are alive. The council head was silent for a long moment. The political calculus was clear. The council had failed publicly. Earth had succeeded monstrously. To punish Earth now would be an act of blatant hypocrisy the wounded Caldarians would never accept. It would also mean picking a fight with the species that had just dismantled the Vorak swarm with things from its nightmare box. What do you want? The council head finally asked, its tone subdued. Park Min spoke this time. The quarantine of Earth ends. Today. Not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of reality. You feared what you did not understand. Now you have seen it. We propose a new agreement, the Pact of Mutual Respect. Earth will remain independent. We will not share our biological archives. We will not be inspected. In return, we will not deploy the Guardians unless asked, or unless a threat of the magnitude of the Vorak emerges again. We will trade, we will talk, but we will not be controlled. It was not a request. It was a statement of new facts. The galaxy had a new power, one that did not rule with fleets, but with fear of what lived in the dark. The council had no choice. The agreement, the pact, was ratified in a simple, silent data burst. The quarantine around Sol was lifted. Earth was no longer a death world to be pitied. It was a sovereign, terrifying reality. The final meeting was aboard the Caldarian ship. Kim Jun and Li Hana went as envoys. The ambassador received them in a garden room, a last pocket of beauty aboard the wounded ship. He bowed low. We owe you our lives. Our songs will speak of the dark saviors from the death world. But I must ask, why? You did not know us. Kim Jun looked at a delicate, glowing flower in a crystal vase. On Earth, we have a saying. The enemy of my enemy is still a problem, but sometimes you need a bigger problem. We did not do it just for you. We did it so the galaxy would remember. Mercy is a luxury. Survival is a truth. We know both. The ambassador nodded slowly, finally understanding. They had not been saved by a higher civilization. They had been saved by a more ferocious one. It was a humbler, harder truth. Weeks later, the Gerion was back in its Himalayan berth. The Guardians were returned to their artificial biomes, sleeping, waiting. On a balcony overlooking the snow-capped peaks, Kim Jun and Lee Hana stood in the thin, cold air of home. The council is terrified of us, Hana said, watching a condor circle on the distant wind. Good, Kim Jun replied. Fear is respect for people like us. It means they will think twice before they let another gentle species be wiped out for being illogical to save. He looked up at the sky, where the first stars were becoming visible in the twilight. Somewhere up there, the Galactic Council was rewriting its charts, placing Earth not on the list of minor species, but in a category of its own. Somewhere, the Keldarians were rebuilding, their songs already changing. They pleaded to the stars for mercy. Hana said softly. Kim Jun nodded, a faint, hard smile on his face. The wind picked up, howling through the stones like an old, wild thing. It sounded like home, but Earth's monsters came instead.